The Galactic King appeared on every human broadcast channel, towering over the digital screens, his form massive and imposing, his armor gleaming under lights that seemed to bend around him. The citizens of Earth froze in front of their devices, and the silence of millions of living rooms was deafening. No one spoke, no one moved, only the steady pulse of fear that radiated from the image of the king as he surveyed the humans he had come to dominate. He did not smile. His eyes were empty, like dark pools that swallowed hope and left only dread in their place. It was a sight no one could forget. The king raised a hand, and the channels across the world flickered, showing captured human prisoners, young women dragged across cold metal floors, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror, but some of them held a spark, a defiance, that made the king narrow his eyes and lean forward, as if he could pierce their minds from across the stars. The broadcast continued, without interruption, showing the vastness of the alien fortress orbiting silently above Earth. The structure was enormous, like a city made of black crystal with jagged spires that reached into space. It seemed impossible to climb to the top, and yet the king ruled it with absolute authority. The walls were lined with creatures humans could not even imagine, some crawling, some floating, all with eyes that glowed in colors unseen by human sight. They moved in perfect synchrony, as if connected to the thoughts of the king, as if they existed only to carry out his will. The king spoke, his voice deep and resonant, carrying across every speaker on Earth. The words were not understood by humans at first, but the tone was enough to make hearts tremble. It was a voice of command, a voice that demanded obedience, and yet the images on the screen told the story without words. The prisoners were led to a platform in the center of the fortress, a place where countless executions had taken place before their hands were bound, their eyes burning with fear and fury. The king watched from above a throne of impossible height, and he gestured for the cameras to focus on the scene. Every angle, every detail visible to billions below. The human viewers felt nausea and a burning anger rise within them. They had never seen cruelty so direct, so personal, and yet they could not look away. They were forced to watch as the king demonstrated that he held not just power over their lives, but over their minds, over their variability. To hope, the wind outside the fortress howled as if mourning the fate of the humans trapped within, and yet inside the walls everything was still and controlled. The king leaned forward, a shadow passed across his face, a fleeting moment of satisfaction, as he considered the message he was sending to Earth. That message was clear: resistance was useless, obedience was the only path, and humanity was nothing more than a fragile insect under his boot. And as the broadcast continued, billions watched, in horror, wondering what the next move would be, and feeling for the first time the weight of a war that had not yet begun but already promised to consume the galaxy in fire and blood. The unthinkable happened next. The Galactic King gave the order, and the screens around the world trembled with the gravity of what was about to unfold. The human female prisoners were forced to kneel on the cold metal floor, their eyes wide and their breaths shallow. Each of them clutched at the bonds that held them, trying to find comfort in a gesture that could not protect them. Their minds raced with memories of home, of laughter, of lives that seemed impossibly far away now. The cameras zoomed in slowly, capturing every detail, every twitch, every tear, and every subtle tremor of fear that passed across their faces. It was deliberate, calculated, cruelty designed to break the spirit of those who watched at home, and to make the prisoners feel the full weight of the king's authority. The room in the fortress was silent, save for the echo of the king's voice as he spoke commands in a language humans could not understand, yet the meaning was unmistakable to every viewer across Earth. They knew that death was imminent. The king's expression remained cold and unmoving. His gaze swept across the platform as if reading invisible lines etched into the floor, and then he nodded, a subtle gesture that carried the force of a sentence executed. The first prisoner cried out, her voice sharp and clear, piercing the silence of billions of homes across the planet. The sound seemed to ignite something inside every human watching: rage and horror, and a desperate need to act. The execution was carried out swiftly yet methodically, no mercy, no hesitation, just the absolute fulfillment of a command. The broadcast did not flinch. It showed every moment as if recording history for the galaxy to see. The second prisoner turned to the audience, her eyes searching for any sign of hope or rescue that would never come, and when she realized none existed, her scream joined the first, a chorus of despair that struck the hearts of all who witnessed it. Across Earth, cities erupted in chaos. People dropped to their knees in disbelief. Some could not breathe, some screamed at the sky demanding justice, and some silently vowed revenge. The king watched the reactions on his monitors, like a master studying a painting, the colors of fear and grief flowing across continents. He leaned back on his throne for a moment, the silence stretching only to be broken by the final commands that sealed the fate of the remaining prisoners. One by one they fell, each death precise, each death designed to convey the message that no human life mattered unless it served the king's will. Humanity had never before encountered cruelty so direct, so undeniable, and yet the images on the screens sparked a fire instead of submission. In homes, in offices, in streets across every nation, people clenched fists, set their jaws, and whispered promises of retaliation. They would not forget, and they would not forgive. The king had intended to crush them, and yet he had unknowingly bound humanity together with a single thread of outrage that could not be broken. And as the final prisoner fell, the screen went black, leaving only the echo of the hosted screams and the roar of a human anger that was about to awaken and rise against the stars. The shockwaves of the broadcast rippled across the globe like a storm that could not be contained. Cities that had once been calm erupted into chaos as people struggled to comprehend the atrocity they had just witnessed. The streets filled with cries of grief and rage, the sounds blending into a chorus that seemed to shake the very air. The faces of the dead and dying prisoners haunted screens, phones, and public displays, each image a reminder of the cruelty that had been inflicted without remorse. Families clutched each other desperately, some sobbing uncontrollably, some shaking with fury, while others stared silently at the empty spaces where loved ones might have been. The leaders of Earth faced a crisis unlike any in history. Their offices swarmed with advisors, military commanders, and scientists, each speaking urgently, trying to chart a course through the incomprehensible horror. The news was unstoppable, each channel repeating the broadcast in a loop until there was nowhere to hide, no corner of the planet untouched by the sight of human women being executed by an alien tyrant. The air itself seemed heavy with disbelief and fury across continents. Ordinary people felt a strange mixture of helplessness and determination. Teachers stopped mid-lesson, workers abandoned their posts, children clung to parents, wondering why the world had changed so suddenly and violently. The human spirit that had endured centuries of struggle now ignited with a unified anger that no one could deny. Even those who had once doubted the power of humans felt a burning need to act, their fingers clenched around phones, computers, and radios, sending messages of solidarity, of defiance, across networks that connected the globe. The streets became stages for spontaneous gatherings, people chanting names and slogans, promising retaliation and justice. Governments held emergency sessions declaring the acts of the Galactic King unacceptable and vowing that humanity would not bow. No plan existed yet, but the intention was clear: humanity would fight back. The scientists began analyzing the broadcast images, studying the fortress, the armor, and the weapons, looking for weaknesses in technology that had seemed unstoppable. The soldiers trained tirelessly, their movements precise, their faces hard and unyielding, as if every blow they would deliver in the future was already being practiced. The media continued to report the horror, yet in every report there was also the undercurrent of resolve that the world would not remain passive. The Galactic King had expected submission. Instead, he had sown the seeds of rebellion that were already sprouting everywhere. From quiet villages to sprawling metropolises, humans whispered promises of vengeance and wrote messages of courage on walls that had once been silent. The world had changed in the span of a single broadcast. The atrocity had unified humanity in a way that no diplomacy, treaties, or alliances could have done. The fear that had been intended to paralyze now fueled the readiness to strike back with every resource, every mind, and every ounce of courage available. Humanity could feel the war forming in their hearts long before it reached the stars, and as the last images of the broadcast faded from screens, the anger and determination burned brighter than ever, promising that the age of fear had ended and the age of resistance had begun. The leaders of Earth gathered in emergency chambers, their faces etched with exhaustion and determination. The screens surrounding them flickered with images from the Galactic King's broadcast, reminding them why diplomacy had failed and why negotiation had become impossible. For centuries, humans had debated treaties, alliances, and protocols, but now every argument for patience seemed meaningless. The atrocity had cut through rhetoric and forced action into the forefront of every mind. The council chambers were filled with murmurs and urgent conversations as generals, strategists, and scientists spoke over one another, each word carried the weight of the lives lost, the innocents destroyed, and the worlds at stake. Maps were spread across tables, glowing with light showing fleet positions, resources, and alien territory. Each leader traced possible maneuvers, routes of attack, and defensive positions. Their fingers hovered over markers representing ships and soldiers, knowing that every choice could decide the fate of billions outside the chamber. The streets pulsed with energy. People who had once been ordinary citizens gathered in public squares, waving flags, banners, and messages of solidarity. Their chants echoed through cities, their voices carrying an unspoken but understood vow: humanity would not yield. No leader could ignore the swelling tide of public outrage, nor could they deny the call to action coming from every corner of the planet. Emergency broadcasts informed citizens that the era of negotiation was over, and that preparations for war had begun. Every message was designed to unite, inspire, and mobilize, as factories ramped up production of weapons, ships, and supplies. Scientists worked around the clock developing new technologies, adapting captured alien devices, and reinforcing defenses against attacks that were already being planned. The military drilled relentlessly, as soldiers and volunteers alike were trained in coordinated maneuvers and tactics that had once only existed in simulations. Meanwhile, diplomatic channels that remained open were used not to plead but to warn. The message was clear: humanity would respond to aggression with aggression, and no alien would underestimate them again. In private moments, leaders reflected on the enormity of the choice before them. Every decision carried the weight of potential death and destruction across worlds, yet hesitation was no longer an option. They resolved that Earth would strike with precision, and with unity, drawing strength from the grief and anger that had gripped the population. Every city, every fleet, every soldier was part of a single living organism, pulsing with the intent to reclaim dignity and demand justice. Humanity had learned from the broadcast that fear could be transformed into purpose, that despair could become a weapon when channeled into action. As the council adjourned, the leaders walked through corridors filled with the hum of technology and the quiet murmurs of those preparing for war. Each step echoed with the understanding that the world they knew had ended, and a new era had begun. An era defined not by treaties and compliance but by determination and resistance. The age of fear imposed by the Galactic King had shattered, and in its place humanity forged the age of war. The first strategies were drawn, the first fleets were readied, and the first whispers of defiance carried across space to let the king know that Earth would not kneel, and that the fury of billions had only just begun to awaken. Hidden fleets of human warships began to emerge from shadowed orbital stations and underground shipyards. Colossal vessels that had been kept secret for decades now rose like titans into the pale glow of the atmosphere. The engines hummed with energy, ready to propel them into the void, as pilots and crews secured themselves in cockpits and command centers, every movement precise and rehearsed. The ships varied in size and purpose, some designed for speed and agility, others bristling with weapons capable of leveling entire alien fortresses. Every vessel carried the hopes and fury of billions aboard it. As the fleets gathered, they created an immense formation stretching across skies and space like a living organism united by a single purpose. The citizens of Earth watched the mobilization with awe and rising determination. People crowded the streets to see the ships ascend, some cheering, others weeping silently, yet all filled with the same burning desire for retaliation. In every corner of the globe, ordinary people were transforming into soldiers, scientists, engineers, and pilots, every skill put to use in preparation for the coming war. Mechanics and engineers labored tirelessly, adapting alien technology, building weapons, and reinforcing defenses that had been dormant for generations. Schools and universities were repurposed as training grounds, teaching strategy, tactics, and survival skills to those who had never imagined themselves in battlefields, and rooftops became practice zones for sharpshooters, pilots, and ground troops, as instructors drilled recruits with relentless precision. Even the youngest were taught resilience and the importance of courage as propaganda of hope and unity spread through networks and communities. Messages emphasizing that every action mattered reached everyone from the highest generals to the newest volunteers. Those who had once doubted their importance found themselves driven by purpose and the memory of the atrocities broadcast by the Galactic King. The atmosphere in cities and bases was electric, attention so thick it could be felt in the air. The roar of engines, the clatter of machinery, and the shouts of command created a symphony of readiness as humanity synchronized its resources in a display of unparalleled coordination. No corner of society remained idle. Even artists and writers contributed, crafting symbols, slogans, and morale-boosting messages that would be carried on ships and distributed among the troops. The Galactic King believed that fear and spectacle would crush human resolve. Instead, his actions had sparked a unity and determination that no empire could suppress. Every citizen felt that they were part of something greater, a collective force that had risen from grief and horror into organized power. Humanity's fleets now hovered at the edge of the atmosphere like a storm, ready to break against the alien forces above. The first orders were given, and the pilots felt the weight of expectation in their hands, their eyes fixed on the stars, knowing that the fate of billions rested on their skill and courage. The engines roared to life, ships streaking into the void, leaving trails of light that seemed to mark the beginning of a war that would echo through the galaxy. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and the world was watching as humanity prepared to strike with every ounce of strength, intelligence, and unyielding resolve that it possessed. The age of retaliation had begun, and the Galactic King would soon realize that no power could contain the fury of a united humanity. Ordinary citizens across Earth were becoming extraordinary in ways they had never imagined. Before the broadcast, they had lived quiet lives, tending farms, running shops, teaching children, and pursuing careers that seemed ordinary and safe. Yet the atrocity of the Galactic King had transformed them into a force united by purpose and fueled by rage. Scientists who had once worked quietly in laboratories now pored over alien technology, deciphering codes and reverse engineering weapons. They collaborated across borders, sharing knowledge that had been hoarded for decades. Their hands moved with precision and speed as they built devices that would give humanity an edge in a war that spanned the stars. Engineers and mechanics who had repaired engines and machines in factories suddenly found themselves on the decks of massive warships, adjusting thrusters and weaponry, ensuring that every system would perform flawlessly in the heat of battle. Pilots who had flown cargo and passenger ships were now being trained in high-velocity maneuvers and combat tactics, their reflexes sharpened, their minds focused on the skies above where alien fleets could strike at any moment. Soldiers who had once patrolled borders now drilled relentlessly, learning coordinated attacks and defensive formations that could adapt to the unimaginable strategies of the Galactic King. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens volunteered to join the resistance, learning basic combat skills, survival techniques, and communications protocols. They trained in converted schools, gyms, and abandoned warehouses, their determination visible in every sweat-soaked shirt and every calloused hand. Even children were taught the importance of courage, strategy, and observation, turning them into messengers, scouts, and lookouts who could contribute to the war effort in meaningful ways. Communities across the globe organized themselves into units providing food, medical aid, information, and support to the troops. Each neighborhood became a network of resilience and ingenuity, ensuring that every person felt valuable and capable of making a difference. Artists and writers created propaganda, not to deceive but to inspire hope and courage, crafting messages of unity and determination that would be carried on posters, screens, and broadcasts, reinforcing the collective spirit. The human spirit was transforming grief into strength, fear into focus, and desperation into strategy. People who had once doubted their own abilities now realized that their actions could tip the balance of battles, their knowledge could save lives, and their courage could inspire millions. The air on Earth was electric with energy, tension, and purpose, a living force that seemed to radiate from cities into the sky and out into space, as if the planet itself was preparing to strike. Every hand that built, every mind that calculated, every eye that watched contributed to a single unstoppable momentum. The Galactic King had believed humans would break under fear, yet his cruelty had created warriors and strategists, scientists and pilots, and ordinary people who understood that the war ahead was theirs to fight and theirs to win. Humanity was no longer reactive, it was proactive and unstoppable. Every citizen felt the surge of power and responsibility, knowing that together they could face the stars and challenge the might of the Galactic King. As one unified force that would not relent and would not forgive. The age of resistance was now in full motion, and Earth had become a crucible, forging heroes from the ordinary, shaping a force that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The Galactic King observed the humans from his throne high above their fragile planet. He had expected terror, submission, and compliance. Instead, he found defiance and unity that spread faster than any of his calculations could predict across the galaxy. His monitors relayed the mobilization of fleets, the adaptation of technology, and the transformation of ordinary citizens into soldiers, scientists, and pilots. The humans moved with a coordination and determination that defied their size and resources. His eyes narrowed as he traced every fleet movement, every production line, every training ground, trying to understand how a species he had considered insignificant had become capable of such rapid preparation. The king had ruled over countless worlds with fear and power, yet Earth was teaching him something new. Every broadcast of grief and rage became a data point, every assembly of people a signal that could not be ignored. He leaned forward on his throne, his claws tapping lightly against the armrest, a rhythm of impatience and curiosity. The alien advisors around him waited silently, knowing that the king's attention was fully consumed by the humans. Their whispers were careful, measured suggestions that he ignored. As he calculated outcomes and probabilities, the humans were dangerous in ways he had not anticipated. They were unpredictable, fueled not by logic alone but by emotion, courage, and an unyielding sense of justice that algorithms could not predict. He recalled the broadcast of the execution of the female prisoners, the horror, the fear, the rage. It had seemed like the ultimate display of power. Yet it had ignited a fire that spread across continents and oceans. He realized that cruelty had strengthened them, had given them a reason to unite and focus like nothing else could. The king's mind raced, considering strategies of intimidation and subjugation that had worked countless times before, and yet none seemed applicable to this species. The humans adapted their technology, assimilated their knowledge, and trained their bodies and minds at a pace that shocked him. His advisors began to murmur cautionary warnings, suggesting containment strikes or limited engagements, yet he waved them away, confident that his power could crush any rebellion. However, doubt had begun to creep in, a foreign sensation that made him restless. Even in the silent moments on his throne, he could feel the undercurrent of human preparation building like a storm, ready to break. The images of fleets rising into the sky, the sounds of engines, the drills and exercises, the assembly of scientists, engineers, and volunteers all haunted him in ways he had never experienced. Fear had never touched him before, yet now it lingered at the edge of his consciousness, not overwhelming but persistent enough to demand attention. The king had underestimated them, and underestimation in war was deadly. His mind calculated probabilities and strategies, yet the human spirit proved to be a variable impossible to contain. He shifted in his throne, studying every detail, every broadcast, every intercepted message, and for the first time he felt that he might be facing a war that would test his empire in ways he had never known. The humans had become more than a nuisance, more than a target. They had become a force with resolve, intelligence, and a unity born of grief and rage, and the Galactic King understood that the coming conflict would demand everything he possessed, and perhaps more than even he could command. Humanity struck back with precision and fury, the first coordinated assaults tearing through alien-controlled sectors like lightning. Across the void, the warships that had once been hidden now moved with purpose, striking orbital stations, supply depots, and communication hubs with devastating effect. Each maneuver was calculated, every attack synchronized across fleets and planetary defenses. The humans adapted in real time, learning from every encounter, improving strategies, and exploiting weaknesses that had once seemed impossible to reach. Explosions lit the darkness of space as alien vessels were disabled or destroyed, while smaller human squads infiltrated key facilities, sabotaging power systems and gathering intelligence. The enslaved worlds watched silently at first, their hope rekindled by the audacity of the humans. Many of them had lived under alien rule for centuries, believing resistance was futile, yet now whispers of revolt spread from city to city as humans demonstrated that the seemingly invincible Galactic King could be challenged. Coordinated uprisings began simultaneously on multiple planets. Rebel forces struck at armories, supply lines, and military command centers, while human fleets provided cover and guidance, allowing the rebellions to gain critical ground. Civilians who had been hiding in fear now took up arms, assisting the rebels, providing food, shelter, medical aid, and local knowledge that proved invaluable. The humans combined strategy, firepower, and ingenuity, turning each skirmish into a lesson for the next. The Galactic King's forces were thrown into chaos, Their communication networks disrupted, supply chains severed, and morale shaken by the sudden and unexpected resurgence of human aggression. Alien commanders attempted to respond with counterattacks, yet they found themselves outmaneuvered, adapting slowly to a force that anticipated and learned at every turn. On Earth, the people watched each success with awe and determination, feeling the collective pulse of a war that was no longer distant but unfolding across the stars. Every family, every neighborhood, contributed in ways large and small, their work supporting fleets and rebels alike. Scientists engineered new weapons and defenses, using both human ingenuity and salvaged alien technology. Pilots refined maneuvers and tactics, learning from every engagement. Soldiers trained relentlessly, sharpening skills and coordination, while volunteers ensured that every effort was organized and effective. The humans were not merely reacting, they were initiating a chain of strikes that forced the Galactic King to reconsider his assumptions about their capabilities. The enslaved worlds joined the rising tide, providing information, opening new fronts, and launching insurgencies that stretched alien resources thin. The war became a galaxy-wide struggle with humans at the center, their courage and determination serving as a beacon for the oppressed and a warning to the powerful. Every victory inspired uprisings across planets previously thought impossible to reclaim, and every setback taught lessons that strengthened the resolve of the human forces. The humans had transformed grief and rage into action, strategy and unity into power and resilience. The first strikes had not only reclaimed territory and disrupted alien operations, but had ignited hope across the galaxy, proving that the Galactic King was not invincible and that humanity would fight not just for survival, but for justice, freedom, and the honor of those who had been lost. The battle lines had been drawn, the war was underway, and humanity had awakened as a force no tyranny could suppress. The war had reached a turning point. Humanity now moved as a unified force, striking across the galaxy with relentless precision and unshakable resolve. The fleets that had once emerged from secret bases now formed massive armadas, cutting through space like streaks of light and fire. Their attacks were coordinated, devastating, and strategic, targeting alien strongholds, command centers, and supply lines with efficiency that left the Galactic King reeling. Each victory inspired new waves of rebellion on worlds long enslaved. Planets that had known only despair now erupted in uprisings, coordinated with human forces and fueled by hope and courage. The humans were no longer reacting to alien dominance, they were initiating campaigns, expanding the front lines and reclaiming territories that had been considered lost for centuries. Civilians continued to contribute from every corner of Earth and liberated planets. Engineers and scientists developed new weapons, defenses, and technologies, while medical teams cared for the wounded and logisticians ensured that supplies reached the front lines. Pilots executed daring maneuvers, soldiers engaged in coordinated strikes, and volunteers maintained communication networks, all acting in concert. As part of a living, unstoppable organism, the Galactic King watched helplessly as his empire began to fracture. His once formidable fleets scattered by precise attacks, his fortified stations reduced to rubble, and his communications disrupted by both human ingenuity and the rebellions he had underestimated. Every strike against his forces was calculated. The humans had learned from each encounter, improving tactics, adapting technology, and exploiting weaknesses at a speed he had never anticipated. The enslaved worlds continued to rise, joining in the fight, sabotaging installations, providing intelligence, and adding their strength to the human-led offensive. Explosions erupted across planets, cities, and orbital platforms, the void filled with fire and smoke. As the tide of the war turned increasingly in favor of humanity and their allies, the morale of the humans soared, every victory fueling determination, every setback strengthening resilience. Leaders on Earth coordinated massive operations, synchronizing fleets, insurgencies, and logistics across vast distances, ensuring that every effort contributed to the overall war effort. Humanity fought not just for survival but for justice, for the honor of the fallen, and for the freedom of every world that had lived under oppression. The Galactic King's power was immense, yet he faced an enemy unlike any before, united, courageous, and relentless. Humanity's resolve had become a force of nature, impossible to suppress or contain. Across the stars, the message was clear. Fear could no longer bind the humans. They had transformed grief into courage, despair into strategy, and rage into unity. Their war was not only for survival, it was for the future, the memory of the fallen, and the liberation of every enslaved world. The age of fear imposed by the Galactic King had ended, the age of resistance had begun, and humanity would continue to rise. Until the stars themselves knew their fury, humanity had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same again. The war would rage across worlds, civilizations would clash, and history would remember the courage, ingenuity, and unity of those who refused to bow. The galaxy had changed forever, and the humans stood at the forefront, unstoppable, unyielding, and united in a war for justice, freedom, and the honor of the fallen.